Rome had seen fire before. She had seen empires rise in marble and fall into dust. She had watched blood soak her stones, prayers echo through her halls, and crowns crumble beneath time. But 1916 felt different. This was not the roar of invading armies at her gates. This was not the clash of swords or the march of legions. This was a quieter terror, a fear that crept through alleyways, that sat beside families at dinner tables, that whispered through churches where candles burned lower than ever before. Across Europe, the world was tearing itself apart. The Great War raged on, brothers killing brothers, nations bleeding, hope collapsing faster than borders. And Rome, ancient, holy, weary Rome, stood watching the sky, wondering if she would be next. In the poorer quarters of the city, hunger had become a daily companion. Bread lines stretched longer than patience. Protests broke out in the streets. Anger simmered just beneath the surface. People prayed, but their prayers were heavy with fear. Some prayed for victory. Some prayed for survival. Others no longer prayed at all, because when the world burns long enough, even faith begins to feel fragile. That night the air was wrong. The wind carried the sharp scent of smoke before the flames were even visible. A distant glow flickered against the ancient walls, small at first, then growing. Shouts rose in the streets. Fire. Not the controlled flame of hearths and candles, but the wild kind, the kind that consumes, the kind that does not ask permission. Homes caught first, then shops, then entire streets. Rome was burning. People ran, carrying children, carrying memories, carrying whatever could be saved. Some screamed, some cursed God, some fell to their knees in panic. Church bells rang, not in celebration, but in warning. A desperate sound meant to wake a city already wide-eyed with terror. And yet, while the city screamed, one girl knelt, not in the street, not in the chaos, but in the quiet shadow of an old chapel. As ash drifted through the air like black snow, she did not hold water. She did not carry a weapon. She did not shout orders or demand answers. She prayed. While flames climbed walls, while fear ruled hearts, while Rome trembled under the weight of war and fire, she bowed her head. Her name would not appear in newspapers. No monument would be built in her honor. No general would salute her courage. Most people that night never even noticed her, but history has a strange way of remembering what the world overlooks, because sometimes the loudest act of defiance is not a scream, but a whisper. Sometimes, when everything is collapsing, the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to run. So we ask the question Rome itself seemed to ask that night: can one prayer stand against a collapsing world? Can faith survive when fire surrounds it? Can hope breathe when smoke fills the sky? Can a single, unseen girl make a difference when an ancient city is crying out in pain? This is not just a story about fire. It is a story about belief, about courage that does not look heroic, about faith tested not in comfort but in catastrophe. This is the story of the girl who prayed while Rome burned. Rome in 1916 was not at peace. She was standing still, but only because she was afraid to move. Beyond her ancient walls, the world was tearing itself apart. The Great War had turned Europe into a graveyard of nations. Every week brought new lists of the dead. Every train station carried sons who might never return. And though Rome was far from the trenches, she felt the war in her bones. Fear lived here now. It lived in the way people spoke in hushed tones, in the way shopkeepers watched the street before closing their doors, in the way mothers held their children just a little tighter. Food had become uncertain. Bread was no longer guaranteed. Meat was a memory for many families. Lines stretched through streets at dawn, men and women waiting in silence, hoping supplies had not run out. Sometimes they did, and when hunger meets fear, anger is never far behind. Protests erupted without warning. Voices rose, fists followed, shops were smashed, arguments turned into riots. The war had not yet reached Rome with guns, but it had reached her hearts. Soldiers marched through streets older than their own nations. Boots struck stone that had once carried emperors. Rifles brushed against columns built for gods. Young men in uniform passed beneath arches raised centuries before their birth. They looked small here, and tired. Some walked proudly, others stared straight ahead as if afraid to meet the eyes of the city itself. Rome watched them all. She had seen soldiers before thousands of times in countless forms, but these ones were different. These soldiers marched not with certainty but with questions. Churches filled each day. Candles burned from morning until night. Not for celebration but for survival. The faithful came first, then the uncertain, then even those who had not prayed in years. They came because fear has a way of leading people back to God. Priests spoke of endurance, of sacrifice, of trusting in divine will. But beneath every sermon hung the same unspoken question: how much longer? In the poorer districts, danger came faster. Old buildings stood too close together, wooden beams dried by age and neglect. One spark was enough. Small fires began to break out. At first they were contained, buckets of water, neighbors helping neighbors. But with each passing week the fires grew bolder, more destructive, more frequent. As if the city itself were feverish. Rome felt old that year, not wise old, not dignified old, but wounded old. Her stones were chipped, her people were tired, her spirit felt stretched thin. She was a mother who had buried too many children, a queen who had lost control of her kingdom, a witness to suffering she could no longer prevent. And still she endured because Rome always had. By evening the air often carried the scent of smoke, not always from fire, sometimes from factories, sometimes from kitchens, but no one trusted it anymore. Every glow on the horizon was watched, every shout in the street made hearts race. The city lived on the edge of something terrible. And on one night in particular that edge finally broke. It began with a rumor. A breathless man running through a narrow street, a woman shouting from a window, a bell ringing where no bell should ring. Fire, not small, not contained. A fire spreading faster than anyone expected, from the poor districts toward the heart of the city. Toward homes, toward churches, toward everything Rome still held dear. And as the news raced through the streets, Rome held her breath, because she knew this fire was different. This one would not ask permission. While Rome prepared for fire, there was a girl most people never saw, not because she was hidden, but because she was ordinary. Her name was Lucia. She was 17 years old, though the weight in her eyes made her seem older. War had not taken her with bullets, but it had taken everything else. Her father was gone, lost somewhere beyond the mountains, swallowed by a conflict that never returned explanations. Her mother followed not long after. Not from a wound, but from illness, the kind that spreads when fear and hunger lie too close together. By the time Lucia learned to stand alone, there was no one left to lean on. She lived near an old chapel at the edge of a narrow street. The building had been there longer than anyone could remember. Its stones were chipped, its doors creaked. Its roof leaked when it rained. Most people passed it without looking. Lucia did not. Every morning before the city fully woke, she stepped inside, not because anyone asked her to, not because she was paid, but because the silence there felt honest. To survive, Lucia worked wherever hands were needed. She scrubbed floors in houses that were not hers. She carried baskets at the market. She washed clothes in cold water until her fingers ached. Her wages were small, sometimes late, sometimes not given at all, and still she returned the next day. People noticed her only enough to judge her. She wastes her time praying, they said. She should be working harder. She believes God listens to girls like her. Some laughed when they saw her kneel in the chapel. Others shook their heads and walked past. They gave her names, not cruel enough to feel like insults, but sharp enough to leave marks. They called her the foolish girl. Others whispered, the praying shadow. Because she was always there, quiet, unwoven, half seen in the candlelight. Lucia heard the names. She felt the stares, but she did not argue, because she believed something they did not. She believed prayer was not weakness. She believed it was strength the world no longer understood. Politics argued, weapons demanded. Men shouted and marched and burned cities trying to prove their power. But prayer asked for none of that. It did not conquer, it did not threaten, it trusted. When Lucia prayed, she did not ask for riches, she did not ask for safety. She prayed for mercy, for wisdom, for hearts not to harden completely. She prayed for soldiers she would never meet, for mothers she passed in the street, for a city that seemed tired of carrying its own history. Rome did not know her name, but she knew Rome. She felt its fear in the air, its exhaustion in the faces of strangers, its anger in the way voices rose too quickly, and she prayed harder. On the evening the fire began to spread, Lucia was working near the market. She smelled the smoke before anyone spoke. Others panicked. She paused, not because she was brave, but because fear was not new to her. As shouts echoed down the street and people began to run, Lucia did not follow them home. She turned and walked toward the chapel. Toward the place everyone else ignored, because in a world that trusted noise and force, Lucia trusted something quieter, something older, something she believed could still stand when politics failed and weapons burned out. That night, while Rome rushed to save what it could hold in its hands, Lucia prepared to hold something else. She knelt. And the fire was only just beginning. The fire did not announce itself politely. It did not knock, it did not wait. It arrived like an answer no one wanted. At first it was only light, a fierce orange glow rising behind rooftops, flickering against windows like a warning. Then came the heat. Homes caught fast. Dry wood snapped and screamed. Markets crowded with stalls and cloth burned like offerings. Flames leapt from roof to roof as if the city itself were made of breath and memory. People ran. Some carried children wrapped in blankets. Others dragged carts loaded with whatever hands could grab. Shouts collided in the streets. Names were called and swallowed by smoke. Panic moved faster than reason. Move, get out, help us, and beneath it all another sound, cursing not at the fire, not at the wind, at God. Where are you now? Is this your mercy? Have you abandoned us? Fear has a way of stripping faith down to its bones. Soldiers arrived with buckets and orders. They formed lines, they shouted commands, but fire does not listen to rank. Water vanished into steam, walls collapsed without warning. Men trained for war stood helpless against a blaze that did not care who they were. Their faces told the truth, their voices could not. They were losing. Bells began to ring, not one many, from different churches, different towers, a chorus of desperation. Bells meant to call people to prayer now called them to flee. They rang until hands ached and ropes burned skin, as if sound alone could push back the flames. Smoke filled the streets, eyes burned, breath shortened. Ash fell like dark snow, settling on shoulders, on hair, on open palms. Rome disappeared behind her own suffering. And in the middle of it, Lucia stood still. She felt the heat press against her face. She heard the panic surge around her. Someone shoved past her. Another screamed for her to run. She did not, because fear was loud and she had learned to listen for quieter things. As the crowd rushed away from the flames, Lucia turned in the opposite direction. Toward the chapel, toward the narrow street others had abandoned. Her steps were small but certain. Her heart pounded not with terror but resolve. The air thickened as she walked. Smoke wrapped the city in a choking veil. Still she went on. The chapel door was hot to the touch. She hesitated only once, then she pushed it open. Inside, the air was dim and heavy with incense and dust. Candles trembled as the building shuddered. Outside, Rome screamed. Inside, there was only breath. Lucia fell to her knees, not because she was fearless, but because she believed kneeling was not surrender. Smoke slipped through cracks in the walls, ash drifted through broken panes, her eyes watered, her chest tightened. Still she prayed, no long words, no rehearsed speech, only truth, only faith stripped bare. While the city burned, while bells rang themselves hoarse, while soldiers fought a losing battle, Lucia knelt, and the fire crept closer. Inside the chapel, time moved differently. The fire raged outside, roaring, devouring, demanding attention. But here there was only stillness. Stone walls held back the worst of the heat. Candles flickered, stubborn and small. Their light trembled, but it did not go out. Lucia knelt where she always knelt. Her hands rested open in her lap, not clenched, not shaking, just open. Smoke slid through cracks like an unwanted guest. It burned her throat. Tears formed in her eyes, not from fear, but from breath denied. She did not wipe them away. She bowed her head. Heartbeat pulse softened slightly. She did not begin with words. For a moment there was only listening. The collapse of wood outside, the shouts fading into distance, the sound of a city breaking. Then she spoke, not loudly, not bravely. Honestly, Lord, the word barely left her lips. She had said it 1,000 times before, as a child, as a daughter. As someone who believed the world was held together by more than stone and power, her mind drifted backward. She remembered her mother's voice, gentle, steady, teaching her how to pray by candlelight, not to demand, not to bargain, but to trust. She remembered small hands folded together, a simple chapel, a faith that felt safe. That world was gone, but the prayer remained. Have mercy, Lucia whispered, not just for herself, for the man shouting curses in the street, for the mother running with no place left to go, for the soldiers who could not stop what was coming, for Rome. Have mercy on this city, she said, on her people, on her soul. Outside, flames clawed higher. Inside, silence answered, and she continued, forgive us, not because she knew every sin, but because she knew pain had made people cruel. Fear had sharpened tongues, hunger had hardened hearts, war had taught men to forget each other's faces. Forgive us, she repeated, for what we've done and for what we've become. Smoke thickened, her chest burned now, each breath was a decision. The chapel door rattled as heat pressed against it. Anyone else would have left, anyone else would have run. Lucia did not. Because she believed prayer was not something you did until danger arrived, it was something you did inside it. She prayed not for the fire to stop. She prayed for courage to remain faithful even if it didn't. Outside Rome cried, inside one girl listened. The contrast was almost unbearable. Chaos against calm, noise against stillness, power against surrender. And yet the stillness held. Lucia pressed her forehead to the cold stone floor. If this was to be the end, she wanted it to find her here, not fleeing, not screaming, trusting. She remembered the words her mother once told her, even when the world is loud, God hears the quiet ones. So Lucia stayed, as the fire crept closer, as smoke filled the air. As fear waited at the door, she stayed, and her prayer did not stop. By midnight, the fire no longer moved like an accident, it moved like a decision. Flames crossed streets without hesitation. They climbed walls that had stood for centuries. They devoured roofs, markets, homes, everything that had once promised shelter. Rome was no longer fighting a fire. She was losing a part of herself. Buildings fell, not slowly, not gracefully. Stone cracked, beams gave way. Entire facades collapsed into the streets they had watched over for generations. People screamed from windows too high to reach. Voices called out names that would never answer. Some were trapped behind walls of heat. Others beneath rubble that grew heavier with every second. Rescue came too late, or not at all. Churches were not spared. Ancient doors burned black, stained glass shattered and fell like colored rain. Altars cracked under falling beams. Places meant for refuge became places of loss. And when churches burn, something deeper breaks. Leaders gathered where they could. They argued, they shouted orders that could not be obeyed. Water was gone. Men were exhausted. The fire answered to no one. Faces once confident now wore panic openly. Rome's protectors did not know how to protect her anymore. Rumors spread faster than flames. In alleys and courtyards, people whispered, "Rome is cursed. This is punishment. God has abandoned us." Some said the city had angered heaven. Others said heaven no longer listened. Faith cracked under the heat. And still in the small chapel at the edge of the chaos, Lucia remained. Her voice was hoarse now, her breath shallow. Smoke filled the space until candles burned dim and weak, but her prayer did not stop. She prayed between coughs, between heartbeats. Not loudly enough to be heard outside, but strong enough to be felt. At first no one noticed, then someone did. A man fleeing the fire ducked into the chapel for air. He expected panic. He found a girl kneeling. Another followed, then another. They did not speak. They watched her pray. In a city collapsing around them, she did not move. Her courage was not dramatic, it was steady, and it unsettled them. Word spread quietly. "There's a girl still inside. She won't leave. She's praying." Some laughed it off. Others shook their heads, but a few stopped running. They stood at the chapel door. They crossed themselves. They knelt beside her, not because they were suddenly brave, but because fear had exhausted them. And her stillness felt like shelter. Outside, Rome burned. Inside, something else was happening. Not a miracle, not yet, but a reminder that even when stone falls, faith can stand. And as the fire reached its cruelest hour, eyes began to turn not to the flames, but to the girl who refused to flee. No one noticed the change immediately. Fire does not announce when it grows tired, but something in the air shifted. The smoke that had pressed low against the streets began to lift. Ash no longer fell straight down, it drifted sideways. The wind had turned, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. Flames that had been racing toward the chapel hesitated. They leaned away as if unsure. Those standing at the doorway felt it first, a breath of cooler air against burning skin. Someone looked up, someone whispered. The fire slowed, still dangerous, still alive, but no longer unstoppable. Moments later, another sound joined the night. Rain, not heavy, not saving, just drops, scattered, gentle. They darkened the ash on stone. They hissed when they touched the embers. Some laughed through tears. Others fell to their knees where they stood. "What does it mean?" someone asked. No one answered. Word spread quickly now. "The fire is turning. It's stopping. Look near the chapel." People gathered, cautious and stunned. They saw the walls still standing. They saw the door still closed. And inside Lucia, she was still kneeling, but her strength was gone. The prayer that had carried her through the worst of it finally spent her breath. Her body swayed once, then folded forward. She did not cry out. She simply collapsed. Hands reached for her. Careful, reverent. Townspeople lifted her gently, as if afraid to disturb something fragile and holy. Someone wrapped her in a coat. Another held her head. "She's alive," a voice said, quiet, relieved. They carried her outside, past walls still warm from fire, into air that finally felt breathable. By morning the fire was no longer spreading. It still smoldered red, still burned in pockets, but its hunger was gone. Exhaustion had claimed it as it had claimed the city. Some called it coincidence. A change in weather, a shift in wind, others called it something else, a mercy, a sign, a miracle. No one could prove anything, but everyone remembered where the fire stopped. Lucia did not wake to applause. She woke to sunlight through broken clouds, her head resting on stone steps. Rome was quiet now, not peaceful but alive, and in that silence a question settled over the city like morning light. Was this the moment everything changed, or was it the moment people chose to see differently? Morning revealed what the night had hidden. Rome stood in ashes. Streets were blackened, walls were scarred, homes that had once held laughter were reduced to silence. Smoke rose in thin, tired lines, as if the city itself were as alien after holding its breath too long. Survivors moved slowly. They stepped over rubble, counted what remained, and searched for names they were afraid to speak aloud. Some wept openly. Others could not cry at all, lost as that. In courtyards and kitchens, in broken churches and crowded shelters, people talked, not about the fire but about what happened during it, about the moment the wind shifted, about the rain that should not have come, about the chapel that still stood, and about the girl. The one who prayed, they said. The one who didn't run. Stories traveled faster than truth ever does. By afternoon the details had changed. Some said she prayed all night without stopping. Others said the flames bowed away from the chapel walls. A few claimed they heard bells ring without hands. Lucia said nothing. When she was strong enough to stand, she returned to the place everyone now whispered about, not to be seen, not to be thanked, but to clean. She swept ash from the chapel floor, she straightened benches, she replaced candles that had burned down to nothing. People came looking for her. They wanted a face for their relief, a voice for their questions. Someone to explain what could not be explained. She did not give them that. Lucia prayed as she always had, in silence, without witnesses. Some believed she had saved Rome. They spoke her name with reverence. They crossed themselves when they passed the chapel. They said God had listened to her because she was pure. Others dismissed it. She only prayed, they said. The wind changed. The rain came. Anyone could have done that. But the words never sounded as certain as they hoped, because deep down they knew many people had been there that night. Many people had feared. Few had stayed. Lucia returned to her work. She scrubbed floors again, carried baskets again, walked the same narrow streets. Nothing about her life changed. Except the way people looked at her. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away. She accepted both, because she had not prayed to be remembered. She had prayed because it was who she was. Rome would rebuild. She always did. But something quiet lingered in her streets now, the memory of a girl who knelt when the world told her to run. History prefers certainty. It likes dates, causes, and conclusions it can underline, but the truth is rarely that clean. After the fire, Rome rebuilt. Walls were raised again. Markets reopened. Churches were repaired stone by stone. Life returned, not because it was easy, but because Rome had learned how to endure. And yet something had shifted, not in her streets, but in her soul. People remembered the night not only for what was lost, but for what refused to leave. So the question remained, what really saved Rome? Was it the wind that turned at the right moment, the rain that came when it was needed, or was it something harder to measure? Was it prayer spoken not to control events, but to remain faithful inside them? Was it faith, the kind that does not demand proof before it chooses to kneel? Or was it hope, quiet, stubborn, almost invisible, the refusal to believe that destruction has the final word? There are many kinds of fire. There is the fire of war, loud, consuming, destructive, and then there is another fire. One that does not burn cities but keeps people standing when everything else collapses. The fire of belief. Rome survived the first. Perhaps she was steadied by the second. Lucia did not become a saint. She did not write books. She did not give speeches. Time carried her forward as it does everyone else, but her choice remained. She became a symbol not because she sought it, but because people needed one. A reminder that when the world is loud with fear, quiet faith still matters, not to stop every fire, but to stand when it comes. And so Rome rebuilt, older, wiser, changed, because some nights leave scars, and some nights leave lessons. Every generation faces its own fire. Not always one you can see, not always one that leaves ash behind. Sometimes it comes as loss, sometimes as fear, sometimes as a world that feels like it is unraveling faster than we can hold it together. Rome burned in 1916, but the question it asked that night still waits for an answer. When your world burns, when certainty collapses and fear grows loud, what will you do? Will you run until there is nowhere left to go, or will you kneel and trust that even quiet faith has weight? This is not a call to religion. It is a call to reflection, a reminder that courage does not always shout, that strength does not always fight. That sometimes the most powerful response to chaos is stillness, because even if prayer does not stop every fire, it can keep something alive inside us while the flames pass, and sometimes that is enough.